This week is the most important week remaining on the schedule for the Louisville basketball team.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show, and I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On College for $20 off of your first purchase. Louisville will go into the most important week remaining on the rest of their schedule. Games coming up against Clemson and at Pittsburgh. It's going to be their toughest week. It is going to be their most important week. We'll explain why coming up here shortly. We'll preview tomorrow night's matchup against Clemson, why we believe Louisville may be favored in this game, and much more. And then to conclude the show, we'll discuss the big-time returning announcements for the Louisville football team: Isaac Brown, Duke Watson, Chris Bell, and many more. So an exciting show we have planned for you today. We're starting out in the men's basketball realm. Louisville has won the last 4 games. They're currently 10-5 on the season, 3-1 in conference play. And ever since that loss to Kentucky, they've done a really good job of bouncing back. They have 3 ACC wins, all by double digits. Yes, the EKU game was a little bit of a scare. Louisville needed some luck at the end of the game. Noah Waterman getting that layup to help the Cardinals avoid disaster. But Louisville's continuing on through this path in January to where they're going to face some tough opposition. And look, I know the ACC might be a little down compared to what we thought they were going to be like, right? But make no mistake about it, this conference isn't a terrible conference. Yes, it might not necessarily be on the same level as the SEC or the Big 12, but this is a respectable conference. And this upcoming week, you will face 2 teams currently ranked inside of the top 40 in the net. Looking at the ACC, Duke is number 2 in the net. You have Pittsburgh at number 15. There is Clemson at number 37, and Louisville comes in at number 39 after being in 40th next week. For those wanting to know, SMU is currently 41st. So from a competition standpoint, it's not going to surprise anyone to suggest that Clemson and Pittsburgh are 2 of the 3 or 4 best teams in the conference. And you're playing both of those teams this week. Clemson is at home. Pittsburgh is on the road. You're not going to have a week for the rest of the year in which you're going to face 2 teams as good. Yes, you'll play Pittsburgh again. But the game before the second Pittsburgh game is at Virginia Tech, and the one after is versus California. So by default, you look at the rest of the schedule, pretty clear that January is the toughest month. You've already played Duke. You've already played North Carolina. Thankfully, you don't have to play either of those 2 teams again. So by default, this is the most important week from a scheduling standpoint. This is your biggest opportunities. Now, I think it's pretty interesting. If you go to bballnet.com, which is one that I go to look at the net rankings and stuff, it tells you the quad victories. It tells you the opportunities currently that they have coming up. Louisville currently has 3 more opportunities to get a quad 1 victory. Now, this is as of January 6th. One of them is Saturday at Pittsburgh. The next is here in a couple weeks when Louisville goes to SMU. And then the final one is the second Pittsburgh game at home next on March 1st. Outside of that, currently, Louisville has 3 more quad 2 opportunities. The first one will be tomorrow night against Clemson. The next 2 will come in back-to-back games on February 12th and February 16th. Louisville will play at NC State and at Notre Dame. Both of those teams are ranked just inside of the top 115. Notre Dame number 100, NC State number 114. Now, what is really key to point out here is that these things change. Rankings change. If a team goes on a hot streak, that can obviously help the opportunities at hand. If a team you beat goes on a cold streak, it might make that win look a little less appealing in the eyes of the voters. That's why if you're a Louisville fan, it might not necessarily be in your DNA to do so, but you should be wanting Indiana and West Virginia and North Carolina and Florida State to basically, I mean, in theory, win out because it looks better on your resume. It gives you a chance at better wins because right now, Louisville has 3 Q1 opportunities and 3 Q2 opportunities. The rest are Q3 or even Q4. Louisville currently has 1 Q4 opportunity. That's at home against Miami in the middle part of February. So from a schedule standpoint, it makes a ton of sense to realize that this is the most important week. Now, I say that, and what I don't want to be thought is that I'm suggesting that in some weird way that there aren't going to be any more important weeks because you would assume that that's the case, but I have had people on the comments under this show before suggesting that, hey, if this is the most important, then, well, what about this when Louisville plays this team? The SMU game is important coming up. The second Pittsburgh game is important coming up. Every single game on the schedule is important coming up. That goes without saying. That's the prerequisite here. But when you look at the rest of the weeks, this is going to be the most challenging week because currently in my projections, the top 4 teams, like if you made me go with my intuition and tell you who the top 4 teams in the ACC are going to be before the conference tournament starts in mid-March, who's going to get the double byes? Well, Duke is penciled in currently, obviously. I think that that's the one team that everyone has number 1. I also have Clemson and Pittsburgh in my top 4. And then my number 4 team is the Louisville Cardinals. I have Louisville beating out North Carolina, beating out SMU to get that 4th seed. But I'm much higher, it seems like, on Clemson and Pittsburgh than others are, and that's okay. I mean, everyone has their own opinion, but you have an opportunity here from a scheduling standpoint. Also, like I mentioned, the majority of your remaining games coming up currently are quad 3 opportunities, and it's really not even close. So you need to take advantage of the opportunities to get those quad 1 and quad 2 wins. Louisville is 4-0 in quad 2 victories. They're 1-0 in quad 3, 4-0 in quad 4. They're 1-5 in the quad 1. The only win coming to West Virginia. They lost to Tennessee, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Duke, and Kentucky. I mean, those teams better than the Cardinals, maybe outside of the exception of potentially Oklahoma, but nonetheless, they lost that game. So from a resume boosting standpoint, getting a quad 2 win over Clemson, who I project to still be good for the remainder of the season. If you were to get the quad 1 win at Pittsburgh, who I also think is going to remain good for the rest of the season, that's really key because I know the talking point has been, well, does Louisville have the opportunities on their schedule to win games but still get into the NCAA tournament? And I think that answer is yes, but there are some in the fan base that don't believe that. And I think that it's a pretty interesting point of view, but I can understand it because, like I said, combined 6 of the remaining games are either quad 1 or quad 2. So you in turn can't lose a good amount of games like you possibly could in the SEC or the Big 12 because the resume is not going to look that good. Now, granted, you had a really tough strength of schedule, which I think is going to work to Louisville's benefit. But being currently ranked 39th in the net, winning 4 straight games, I think that from a scheduling standpoint, it's the most important. From a resume boosting opportunity, it's most important. But also from a momentum standpoint, after losing to Kentucky, it seemed like just the Just the performance alone gave the Cardinals some confidence. They went on the road and they beat Florida State by double digits, which was a really solid win. They beat North Carolina. They beat Virginia. All three of those games, double digits. All three of those wins, currently quad 2 victories. So looking to be a really, really solid start to the ACC play. And I think if you can split this week, you start out the beginning of January 3-1. The first half of January, you go 3-1. And then you have at Syracuse, first Virginia, at SMU, and Wake Forest. I think that just being able to continue to extend the momentum on a game-by-game basis. Excuse me. Had a hiccup there. Literally a hiccup. If you can continue that momentum through the toughest part of your schedule in ACC play, who knows what can happen when you get to February. And then maybe we're not talking about being on the bubble. Maybe we're talking about improving our seeding. But again, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, because you do still have to have some success against these teams. And 2 teams inside of the top 40, a really good opportunity in the hands of the Louisville Cardinals. I'm extremely excited to see how Pat Kelsey's team is going to approach this week. What's interesting to me, according to one of our title sponsors of the show, FanDuel, Louisville's currently a 3.5-point favorite over the Clemson Tigers. Why is that the case? Well, I think that there's a couple things that could be pointing to that, and we'll discuss what those are and why Clemson is still going to be a really tough matchup for the Cardinals coming up on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. From large upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. If you go to FanDuel.com, like I said, you'll see that Louisville is currently a 3.5-point favorite to beat the Clemson Tigers. I think that that's a pretty interesting line, but I can understand why that's the case. All you have to do, visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Cardinal fans, want to take the time again to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, Locked On Louisville is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Also, the newest episode of Mondays with Dalton Pence aired tonight from 6 to 7 p.m. on Big X Sports Radio. You can find the link on my Twitter page, so be sure to graciously tune into that. I would definitely appreciate it. Louisville, like we mentioned, the most important week remaining on the schedule, facing 2 key opponents versus Clemson and at Pittsburgh. The Cardinals are currently a 3.5-point favorite to beat Clemson, according to FanDuel. If you look at the matchup predictor on ESPN's analytics, Clemson has a 52.9% chance to win this game. And I think it's close to a pick 'em. If you go by the old tale that a home team, you add 3 points to the line or subtract 3 points to the line, if that's how you believe, then that would make sense that if this game were played on a neutral side of competition, it could be, some team plus or minus 1. So I find it very interesting. But at the same time, Louisville's playing really well. Clemson is too. They got the win early on against Kentucky. They beat Penn State. Miami, we didn't know if they were going to be good or bad. They had back-to-back losses against Memphis and South Carolina, and they've handled 3 seemingly. Now, Wake Forest is pretty decent. They beat Wake Forest by 11 points. That was a good win, in my opinion. But they beat Stanford and California, 2 lower half ACC teams. They beat both of those teams by double digits. So if you look at the ACC play, Clemson is currently 4-0. They're tied for first in the conference. Louisville's one loss is to Duke. Again, it's virtually a pick'em game. I wouldn't touch the line because it's really that close, and I think Clemson is a tough matchup for the Cardinals. Let's look at what the Tigers have done in terms of the net rankings. Clemson is currently 37th. They didn't move up or down this past week. They are 9-0. I'm sorry. Yeah, 9-0 in quad 3 and 4 opportunities. All of their ACC games were deemed either quad 3. Actually, they were all quad 3, or all 4 of the quad 3 games were ACC games. They're 2-1 in quad 1. Like, they lost to Boise State, but they beat Penn State on a neutral floor, and then they beat Kentucky at home. And that's pretty interesting, as they looked really good. Ian Shefflin was, fantastic in that game against Mark Pope's team. They won 70-66. They went 1-2 in quad 2 play. Like, they beat San Francisco by 15, which was a pretty decent neutral site win. They lost to Memphis, a game that really they should have won, in my opinion. And they also lost to South Carolina. It was a really, really high-scoring game. So it's really tough to get a grasp on how good this team is. You look at their top 2 players, it's going to be a fun battle to watch between Chucky Hepburn and Chase Hunter. Chase Hunter averaging 17.3 points per game for the Tigers. 6'4" senior from Atlanta, played a lot of college basketball. This is his 6th season of college basketball, all with the Tigers. His last 3 years, he has averaged in double digits, this year being his best year by far, and his best three-point shooting year in his career high. And three-point shots, he's also making his most. In 5.5 attempts, he's making 42%. So Clemson, a top 60 team in the country when it comes to three-point percentage. Louisville's going to have to do a good job of being disciplined around the perimeter and not giving Clemson open shots, because if you do, they will make them. Brad Brownell's team is really good in terms of shooting that perimeter shot. The player that I'm worried about is Ian Shefflin. He's basically I call him the heartbeat of that team. He doesn't lead the team in scoring, but he does everything on the floor. 13.6 points a game on 46% shooting, 33% on 3 attempts per game from 3, and 76% for the free throw line. So pretty good shooting numbers. 10.8 rebounds a game. He averages almost 4 offensive rebounds by himself per game. And being 6'8", 240 pounds, he plays a lot larger than that because of the tenacity that he plays for around the rim, the positioning on the rebounds. This is going to be a tall task for the Cardinals. Yes, Louisville has been doing a great job of limiting offensive rebounds and, frankly, winning rebounding battles between teams. You're going up against a Clemson team now that really gets after crashing the offensive boards. You looked at Victor Lakin as well, 6'11", senior from Russia. I think this actually was his first season at Clemson. He spent the last 3 in Cincinnati, transferred in before the season, averaging 10 a game, and playing good defense, 1.9 blocks per contest, 1.2 steals. So can do a little bit of everything, step outside and hit the deep ball, but also play really effectively around the rim. So the Cardinals are going to face much more of a threat on the interior than they did in the previous 2 games against North Carolina and Virginia. This is going to be more so resembling to Florida State in the front court. Now, one thing that Clemson does better than Florida State is they shoot the ball much better from 3. So, and they don't turn the ball over really. They do, but they're top 50 in turnovers per game. So they don't really turn the ball over that much. I think 10.7 a game. If you're Louisville in this contest, Chucky Hepburn has to play really good defense on Chase Hunter and whoever guards him. Communication is going to be key, switching off on players. I'm intrigued by the matchup with Ian Shefflin. I think it's a by-committee approach type plan. Siobhan Hadley, Abubakar Traore could be the 2 that I would imagine get matched up on Shefflin the most. Lakin, James Scott is going to have to be disciplined against Victor Lakin. And then you have some other players. It's not just those three. Jaden Zachary, veteran guard from the ACC, transferred in from Boston College. He's averaging 9 a game on, actually only about 28% from three. So not shooting the ball well whatsoever to start the year, but traditionally good three-point shooter. You've got Chauncey Wiggins, Dylan Hunter, and much, much more. But balanced team that Clemson has. If you're Louisville, one of the main things is trying to get the crowd involved. I'm not sure what the crowd's going to look like with the snowstorm, but hopefully there's a good attendance there. Louisville's got it. Again, it comes down to the same things. Defend the interior well, limit offensive rebounds, defend the perimeter well, get good shots on the offensive end, limit the unforced errors and turnovers, and just maximize offensive possession. So I think Louisville's going to have a really good shot. Going to have a really good chance to win this game. I think it's going to be really close. I can see it going either way. I'm going to predict a Louisville victory, but I'm talking about maybe last possession type victory because this is going to be a tough matchup. So we'll break down this performance. There won't be an episode tomorrow. I apologize. There will be one probably on Wednesday recapping this game. But to conclude the show, we're going to switch over to the football side of things where Louisville got a ton of good news. And we'll discuss coming up on the final segment of this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Cardinal fans, attending the new 12-team college football playoff game is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated formats and extra teams involved. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I used Game Time Picks to find tickets for the game against North Carolina. I was kind of on the fence on whether or not I wanted to go on New Year's Day and decided pretty close to game time that I wanted to, no pun intended, and I used the Game Time app to be able to find tickets at a really, really reasonable price. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. It was my understanding that the current Louisville football players had up until midnight last night to decide whether or not they wanted to go in the portal. And that makes it more understandable why multiple players confirmed that they would be coming back for next season. And they mainly did it through social media in the form of just posting some graphics that the 502 Circle had created. And the line was, and I quote, "Never left, just making it official." And there's a handful of players that made that announcement. Most notably, Isaac Brown and Duke Watson. We talked about those guys probably being back, but it is official that they are now. Chris Bell, Nate Kariski, Lance Robinson, Pete Nigra, and TJ Quinn. So you might be thinking, well, what's the significance of all this? Well, truthfully, things change so quickly in today's college football portal window that a guy might not be entering the portal today, but they could tomorrow. And just getting the announcement, because we thought that this was going to be the case. Like, we've been operating on this show under the assumption that both Brown and Watson would be back, that there was confidence that Chris Bell would be back and Pete Nigra would be back. But when you get that confirmation from the player, I think that it just means that much more. It alleviates some concerns. And I think it just kind of garners some more excitement saying that, hey, look, this guy's back. That guy's back. That guy's back. It's nice to see Lance Robinson back. Wasn't know if he was going to, coming off of an injury in the preseason. Cardinals bring in some guys in the transfer portal. There's a question as to whether or not Monroe Mills is going to be back. I'm not really sure there. But as of about 9:12 Eastern time on Monday, we don't have an answer on that. But to get Lance Robinson back, who I had high hopes for this season to be in the 2 deep, I think it's key for next year's team. So, key move there. Pete Nigra, starting center for this year's team, will be the starting center for next year's team. So you get some continuity there. And the one that surprised me the most, because everyone that I talked to assumed that he was gone, but he made the announcement that he was coming back. TJ Quinn. I really wasn't, I didn't know one way or the other. He led the Cardinals in tackles for the second straight year. He had 82 this past year, 4 for a loss, 1.5 sacks, and a pass breakup. Having a veteran presence in the linebacker room and adding Caleb Perry for Tennessee, a player that, we'll talk about on the next episode of the show. You limit another scholarship that needs to be used on a defensive player. Like you bring, I felt like Louisville is going to have to go out and get another linebacker along with Caleb Perry. But when you bring back TJ Quinn, so you'll have Quinn and Caleb Perry, you will have Stanquan Clark, TJ Capers, and some other players that Trent Carter. I just feel like this is really, really great news. There's not much more that needs to be said than that. So I didn't know if he was going to go to the portal or if he was going to go to the NFL, but he participated in senior day activities. So did Quincy Riley last year. But everyone that I talked to said, I don't really know what he's going to do, but the vibe was that he was going to move on and it was going to be the young players' time to shine, meaning Stanquan Clark and most notably TJ Capers. And I do think that next year Louisville has to, find a way to get Capers on the field in a good capacity, but that's a conversation for a different day. I just really enjoy that TJ Quinn is going to come back for another season. Louisville really needs a returning veteran presence because they're losing a huge amount of their production from this past season. So Nate Kariski was the other one that we haven't talked about. Actually, Chris Bell and Nate Kariski. Nate Kariski coming back was solid, especially, no Mark Redmond, no Jamari Johnson, likely no Isaiah Cummings, but Jaleel Skinner went to the portal, withdrew, and Nate Kariski coming back. So you bring in a really good tight end option or bring back a really good tight end option. And then Chris Bell, huge. We discussed that it was probably going to happen, that Chris Bell was going to come back. But same thing with Isaac Brown and Duke Watson. Just getting that official news means that much more for the Cardinals. So I'm hoping that we get some more returning player announcements. And I guess technically, who knows, a guy could enter the portal in the spring. But getting these announcements is mustering up a good amount of excitement for next year's team, especially on the offensive side of the football. So that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. We're going to come back on Wednesday to recap the basketball game against Clemson. We'll talk about the new addition in the portal, Caleb Perry, linebacker from Tennessee, and much more. Until next time, we'll see you then. Go Cards.